Hi, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Today we're talking to TC Albert. Many of you have probably seen, purchased, and then worn out your copy of TC's book, Recreating the 18th Century Hunting Pouch. We're going to talk a little bit about what went into and what led up to the publication of that book. I think it's a neat story, and I'm excited to share it with you. But we're actually going to be going back to around 1972 with TC here, when he was about 11 or 12, and how he got into muzzleloading.
This is TC Albert. Thanks for having me on, and you'd like to hear how I got started. And basically, just a farm kid growing up in Papaw, Illinois, and surrounded by old German farmers, Pikes and Schlesingers and Holzers. And though we didn't have a big farm, Dad only had about 6 acres. It was 70s back to basics era.
Okay.
So I grew up doing chores with milk cows and ponies and the works.
Yeah.
And it was fun. Not really. The gardens.
As a kid, it's not very much fun.
No.
But
And Dad was of German descent and Swedish, and the son of a truck farmer. So he had a real specific way about how we garden. And, he had 3 big gardens and an orchard and 3 boys to take care of it all. So we kind of grew up doing that. And Dad figures, because at a garage sale, I think I picked him up a book with a picture of a guy and a rifle and an Indian lady on the cover. I thought, Dad's going to love this. And he never read it. So more or less out of spite, I did. And it turned out to be The Great Adventure by Janice Holt Giles.
oh,
And it spurred me into appreciation of mountain men and that whole culture that I didn't know really existed, but was really starting to bubble up at that time as well with Jeremiah Johnson, Frontier Fremont, all that stuff was becoming popular at the same time, mid 70s, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it was real easy to transition into that with the fields around me and to trap on the creeks. And man, and go out in the winter with moccasins and say I could survive this way, and really try and live the life, even though I was just junior high and early high school at the time, with no guidance, really just what you could find at the time in a book.
Right.
And it was fun.
A book, nonetheless, you just stumbled on.
That's it. And the good thing, there was nobody to tell me I was doing it wrong either. So,
right.
And Dad didn't have any objections to us playing with muzzleloaders and black powder at the time. He thought we were old enough, and in fact, we at the time you could still get your hunter safety courses and gun safety courses in PE at school. You could basically bring your shotgun to school on shotgun day and and have a shooting course and a safety course and leave with your little card in 6th or 7th grade for PE. So that was a rural, different time.
Yeah.
So we had black powder, and Dad would make sure that he'd stop on the way home at a little gun shop and bring me some if I needed it. And I had a cousin at the time he was in Friendship, pretty big in Friendship, and he had a black powder gun shop. He was actually a Joliet cop, but he had a gun shop specialized in black powder, and he set me up with a book. I believe it was written by Toby Bridges, or at least edited by him. It was a black powder digest, I think, about early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And my cousin went through and he highlighted almost every page. This is, don't believe this is ridiculous. And in the back, there was a gun catalog, basically all the guns that you could get or order at the time. And he'd say, you don't want anything to do with this one, or this might be a good one. And really tried to help me.
Yeah.
Gave me a powder horn kit. I built my first horn then from a kit he gave me. And I bought a Hopkins and Allen buggy rifle. It was about all I could afford at the time. It was under $100, and cut my teeth on that. Then I built a numeric. I think it was a numeric, like a Minuteman kit, and probably 74, 75. And ran the creeks with that. And for Christmas, I'd get a CVA Kentucky pistol kit or something. And for some reason, my parents thought that black powder might not be real or something. Because here's these kids, me and my friends running up and down the creeks having shooting contests and basically locked and loaded with black powder.
Right.
And trying to prove that we could live this way and, having our little campsites and cooking raisins and different things all seasons of the year just to see what we could do.
Yeah.
And emulating much of nothing, but a few TV shows we'd seen and things. But still, it was a good experience. It was a good way to grow up.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that it was part of something way bigger. I didn't figure that out till, after I got out of the Marine Corps and started going to gun shows. Met a man who told me about a horn. I thought I'd make a powder horn. And what really got me started was woodworking, believe it or not. There was a book put out by a guy named Drew Langsner. Anyway, it was about green woodworking, all hand woodworking. Oh,
yeah. Yep.
And I thought that was the way to go. That's about as back to basics as you could get. And so I started doing green woodworking and started accumulating some of the axes and froes and different tools. This would be about 1983, 84.
Okay.
And about that time along come Roy Underhill as well.
Yep.
On PBS. And boy, that really sparked an interest. And I thought I had to do everything about the hardest way you could possibly do it.
Yep.
And so I spent a lot of time doing that. But still, the draw towards the Daniel Boone and the history and all that of early America was a real appeal. And I'd come across a section in the book by John Backless, I think is John Backless, about Daniel Boone, his Daniel Boone book. And it described Daniel making a powder horn for the next hunt. And he was old. I think he was in Missouri at the time, but he was planning to go on the next hunt, and he was scraping it as thin as he could with a piece of broken glass. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I can't run in the Kentucky woods in the 1760s or 70s. I can't feel what that's like, but I can make a powder horn and feel what he felt like to do that. Mm-hmm. And so I set about doing that, and I was buying horns to do that with, and met a fella at a gun show. And he said, well, I'll show you some horns and get you started. And he introduced me to some guys that did muzzle loading. And turns out it was guys like Jerry Noble, Kurt Johnson, and Jimmy Dressler, and all the Midwestern guys.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get a better education than meeting those guys.
Right. No, those names are names that I grew up hearing about and here in the Midwest for sure. So that's awesome.
It couldn't have been better.
Yeah.
And so they were more than obliging, more than mentors to share anything they could and help me. In fact, I thought I'd like to get into making the guns. I loved Southern mountain rifles at a time when they were still considered a throwback. They weren't too well received, I don't think, by the general gun collecting community at the time. But there was a fellow in Dixon, Myron Carlson, that made the hardware, hand forged the hardware since the late 1960s. He'd been involved in friendship and making all the parts and restoring guns, and pretty much a master at it by the time I'd met him. And I quickly realized that I'm no metal worker, and I'm besides the family constraints, I'm just not that precision oriented. I don't know enough about it to know if that's what it is, but I know if you screw up on the metal, it's screwed up. You can't really fudge it.
Right. You can't put it back on necessarily.
Unless you're Myron. I mean, he can stretch a barrel and do it, but that was beyond my capabilities. And plus, if I got a metal shop out in the shop, well, I've only got so much family time. To me, I'm working full time, and it seemed better that I could sit in the living room and work on a powder horn or a bag or some kind of a fireside craft, rather than something as dedicated as full-time shop work. I tried to talk my wife into letting me have a shop in the house, but she wouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's kind of the standard reaction.
Yeah, the best windows are in the dining room, but no, I couldn't do it. So anyway, I stuck to the horns, and then each horn, it just kind of slowed down the horn work. I said, well, then you need a bag. And then you need a knife, and you could go out and forge a knife. I could get free on the weekends or whatever and do a little forge work. And, I could I could kind of do a little bit of all of it. And with Myron, I did scratch build a gun or two and learned to make triggers and the temper metal, different things. I was incapable of learning all that he could have taught me. But anyway, I did learn something and got me on my way.
Yeah.
And at the show, I realized who the Tanzels were, and I thought, well, that's Midwest. And the more I studied about them, they kind of bridged a gap between the carved horns from the 1700s. Here, they're still working in some of them the 1850s or so. And I thought that's right here. That's a time period I'm interested in, and I'll learn to carve some Tanzels. So I spent quite a few years just working on that style of horn work and a bag to go with it and a whole set. And we'd sell it at the shows. There wasn't much of a social media outlet at the time.
Right.
Actually set up for Myron once down at Friendship. Ran his booth. That was an experience. Yeah. And,
about when was that?
It was pre-CLA. It was I don't know, or Heather was maybe 1993, something like that, 92, somewhere in there, just to give a guess. And my daughter grew up with it, being that she wanted to be a bagpiper girl for a while.
Okay.
I was interested in my Scottish heritage to a large extent, and we did Highland. There's a branch of reenacting at the time that was for the Highland Games more than anything. Yeah. And I learned to play the pipes and did the old time, the great kilt and the works, for the old time Highlanders, and had some fun with that for a while. And it was welcomed at our local rendezvous.
Oh, nice.
Chaplain Creek Muzzleloaders at the time. It was okay. They didn't mind if that's what we did. So we got a little Panther wall tent and did some rendezvousing and had some fun with that one when our daughter was little. And kind of just kept going in those directions. And then comes the CLA, and that was quite a thing. It was wonderful, to see something. I don't even know how to describe it, to have the opportunities that brought along. Right. And to be part of that.
So would you say that kind of shifted focus maybe from kind of the shooting and the history side of things to the artistic side of things? Or
it did to some degree, because a guy could, you weren't just wasting time. Right. If you learned to be good, you had an outlet for your stuff. You didn't just have to keep it in a box in the back room or something. And, you didn't have to wait for just a few isolated shows here in the Midwest. You could get to know people that you'd only heard about before. Okay. It seemed like a great opportunity, and it definitely was. And, I was real happy to get involved with that when they started, and just to know it was there, to know that there was something to strive for.
Yeah. And that would have been in the late 90s. Is that right?
Whenever we were charter members, so whenever they started, okay. And I should know when that is, but I don't. 96, somewhere around there, I think. But just to guess. But in the meanwhile, at one of those random type shotgun shows, you could still find antique muzzleloader stuff at just a regular shotgun show. Really? I come traipsing home. Now, a guy had a big box full of old pouches in various states of disintegration. Oh my. And they were unbelievably cheap. And I sorted through, and I bought one that I could afford. And I was dead set, I'm going to restore this thing. And when I brought it home, my wife thought I was nuts for buying such a thing. But I did restore it, and I patterned it, and I made copies of it, and it taught me quite a bit. I realized
Oh, I
it was
bet.
probably made out of an old boot. It looked like it was salvaged leather. You could see where the boot straps were, to pull the boot on were
Yeah.
probably stitched, and it was pretty neat to put that back together, then make copies of it, and then take it to the Prairie State show. And
Ah,
and a couple of guys, they said, "Oh, well, you like to do that? I've got one you can do, and I've got one you can do." And pretty soon I was restoring pouches for Jack Vi, and a couple other guys would bring me some or want one like this or that. And eventually, Jack brought me the pouch that's in the book, the cover of the book, the one that's recreated in the book.
mm-hmm.
And he bought that in an auction in Wisconsin, and it came with a Mall rifle from descendants of the Mall family that had gone there, I guess,
Yeah.
according to Jack. So I thought, wow, Northampton County, we could kind of put it into Pennsylvania with the gun, early 19th century, mid to early 19th century, handmade, fancy bag. The fancier the bags got, it seemed the plainer the horns got. But it was something he wanted me to maybe stabilize if I could, and copy for sure. And I thought, yeah, I could do that. And that was the first time I really went and bought a side of leather and the tools and thought I was going to do it just right. And what gave me the confidence to do that was the Buck Skinner book. Had an article about making a bag that way. So reading through that over and over, that's what I did.
Right.
And so it turned out Jack was happy, and I had the pattern. I made a few more. People wanted them like that. Then at work, I was scrolling through the Track of the Wolf, which was another outlet. You could send them your stuff and have it sold by them up in Minnesota. The internet was a thing by then, and they had the ability to photograph it and market it, to anybody that look at their website.
Right.
And so you'd send something up there, and they'd make you an offer or offer to trade you goods for it, or tell you what they'd sell it for and how much you'd get. So reading through their want ads, what they were looking for, they wanted somebody to write a book to go with Scott Sibley's book on recreating the 18th century powder horn.
Right. Okay.
So I thought, I was just stupidly confident enough to pitch a bag book. And they thought it was a great idea and wanted to run with it. So we made that happen. And
Wow.
That was quite an experience. They were masters at it. And they had the digital camera all set up, so we could just sit there and take a picture. No, there's too much flash here, and take it again until it was just what they wanted. And
right.
Within 3 days, and probably 2 solid days of work, we'd photographed the whole book and laid it out from start to finish. And then I came back and filled in all the words to match the photographs.
Okay. So you went out there to kind of on scene, so to speak, to go through the process. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Bonnie and I went up to, was it Elk River, I think, and shot it all in their shop.
Wow.
And it was fun. It was quite an experience. They were wonderful to work with. They knew what they were doing. I had the layout I had made a bag, the finished bag, and pretty much from the raw leather, I had an example of maybe 15 bags in progress, all of that same bag.
Oh.
So I just reach in the file and pull out, here's the next step. And it was already done, cut out, and in process.
Right.
And so I wasn't actually in the book building that bag from start to finish. It was multiple bags that were just copies of each other, basically off the pattern, and then staged in the photographs to make it come together. And it flowed well, and I did finish all of them into the same bags at the end, but it made the process pretty painless up there. It didn't take weeks or anything. It just took a couple of days.
Right. Yeah.
So that I couldn't believe. I kept asking him over and over, "Are you sure? You really wanted it?" I couldn't believe it, that could possibly happen.
So not to cut you off, but at that point, I I have a couple questions. Like, first
Sure.
off, how many bags do you imagine, as just a rough guess, that you had gone through before that point and that opportunity came up?
I have no idea. It's dozens,
Okay.
probably dozens, and I really don't know because I'd make them and take them,
Right. You
and
weren't keeping track of them, that.
not in the least.
Right.
I was tickled somebody was interested in that I could, just basically make a different one,
Yeah.
do another one, and Myron taught me. Now this goes against what a lot of guys can do or would do, but Myron said your time's free. If you got time to fool with this stuff, it's free. So I never priced myself like I was serious about it either. I tried to offer what I could pay, and I'm a Scotch, penny pincher, so
Right.
I can't afford to spend much, and so I would sell the bags basically for what I could afford, and I figured maybe somebody else could too. And
Yeah.
they've always kind of just moved with that philosophy, and I don't regret it in any way. I'm happy somebody's just interested in the stuff, really.
Yeah.
And I get a chance to do another. But by then it was probably dozens, and I'd probably restored, and made copies of at least half a dozen or so.
Yeah.
I would think. And Moore was known for the hornwork, believe it or not, but that niche was already being filled. So I made the bags to go with the horns too. So
Yeah.
that was okay. And learning from the bags was pretty amazing.
Right. That's like an accelerated, figuring
Well,
something out, I would imagine. Like looking at an original gun.
And the bags are usually deteriorated to the point that you don't mind, like, tearing into, you don't tear into it, but you'll give it a little stress. You'll open it up, you'll look and see, and the seams are usually exposed and half torn anyway. So you can tell how a welt was in that bag, or how a gusset was added, or how the stitches were on the inside. You can pretty much see the guts of the whole thing by the time I see them. And that was how you learn, really, to see what the guy did, and then to see what it took to copy that work.
Yeah.
And do your best to copy it. And it goes back to that Roy Underhill thing. He taught all about witness marks from tools.
Yeah.
And so the one field kind of applied to the other field, in the discipline of the old German farm stuff. This is the right way, not the wrong way. And I could kind of put that discipline together for bags too. Knives and stuff, I don't know. The bags and the horns, I know a little bit, and can kind of copy the old ways to some extent.
You mentioned there just a little bit that you were kind of tasked with a few of these, of stabilizing that leather. Yeah. Not to dive into necessarily your process there, but I kind of understand stabilizing wood, but what are you doing when you're stabilizing the leather?
It's contentious, because the best thing you can do is nothing. The best thing you can do is hide it from sunlight, keep it in a humidity controlled, stabilized area.
Okay.
And then not mess with it, and it's going to turn to dust sometime, but you're just trying to keep it from turning to dust on your watch, more or less.
Okay.
But most guys aren't satisfied with that. They want to get it out and show it and stuff.
Right.
So then the arguments begin about what treatments aren't going to oxidize it and make it worse. Some guys early on, some guys would do some horrific things to it, and you just have a big lump of greasy mess, that would never recover. Too much oil. Neat's foot oil's bad. Neat's foot oil's good. Neat's foot oil's not real, unless all those arguments begin.
Yeah.
But really, a light coat of Lexol I found is pretty good. They use it for antique cars and the leather and fancy and high-end things. I got word from some of the guys that had done similar things that Lexol is the product to go to. I've had fairly good luck with lanolins, some lanolins. Mink oil, hit or miss. They say don't use it there again. But if I had to do something, I'd use light wipes of Lexol and try and get it displayed in a case so that there's not a lot of stress on the straps and the hangings, things like that. Right. And best case scenario, make a copy and display the copy,
Right.
and, you know, keep the original. That's what I recommend the most. But yeah, not everybody's satisfied with that answer.
Right. No, I'd kind of wondered, because I've encountered a few really old pouches, you know, in recent years especially, and I've always wondered about that, like what that process looks like, and that makes a lot of sense for a compound like Lexol to come in out of car restorations, because that's where you have, you know, at least some contemporary old leather that's seen some wear and tear, and it makes sense for it to kind of apply back to an old shop pouch.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you get into the different eras where if the leather was speedily tanned with some acids, some of the sulfuric acids and things,
okay,
they say that the humidity will reactivate those acids, and over time, humidity will create a weak sulfuric acid in the leather itself, and that's where you start to get red rot. So when a guy brings a bag that's sloughing its dermis, you know, or that smooth layer, it's cracking off and it's red and flaking off in your hand, that's a lost cause, more or less. You can stabilize that, look at it, and that's about it. But red rot is terrible. And that's probably from the 1850s on, you know, that era, you get that terrible leather. That
industrialization.
Yeah. And then some of the earlier leathers, I've got some what they'd call tawed or mineral tanned leathers, like a deer hide from the frontier. That stuff just gets like cardboard hard. I mean, I don't know what you can do with that, except display it. I've got an original like that just in a case to look at, and it's neat. It's neat to look at, but I would never try and treat that with anything.
Right.
But yeah, it depends on the condition of the bag, when it was made. Each case is kind of unique, and what you're willing to try and live with the results of, basically.
Right. Yeah.
At least for me, I'm no expert. You can look up the museums, and they're all worried about the pH, you know, and neutralizing and all those things that are probably way over my head. But
that's kind of how I look at a lot of that stuff. Is that I don't think I can ever have anything where I can legitimately worry about the pH of it. But if that ever comes across, I'll find somebody smarter than me.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, there's some experts, and basically in the end, they'll tell you stabilize if you can, and keep it out of sunlight, and keep it in a humidity controlled environment, like a dresser drawer or something, you know, where it's safe.
Right.
That's about it.
My last question, real quick, on kind of this segment. Sure. You talked about you had this restoration come in, and that was the first time you went through and bought a side of leather specifically for making bags. What were you making them out of before then, and how were you restoring things?
Any leather I could get given, or any leather I could find. You know, you hear the old purse, you know, the old boots, whatever, the old coat, anything you could find and use that would approximate a leather bag. And that was, a lot of that was coming out of the buckskin era, where it seemed like anything went.
Right.
I wasn't as outrageous as some of the laced up bags and stuff you see. At least I don't think I was. But you know, I was kind of frugal, and I couldn't justify going in too deep at the time.
Right.
And I didn't know how to get too deep at the time either. But when Jack Vi brought me that bag, I realized it was a special occasion to you know, well, they say root hog or die, I guess. So anyways, I went up to a local tandy store and had them help me pick out a leather that would be good, and just was amazed at the smell of that leather all the way home.
Yeah.
And it was a joy to work with. It was, and that was a learning curve too, because some of the early stains and aging methods and the spirit dyes and things are pretty harsh on the leather. And I learned that the hard way. That there's some things that you might not want to do that seem like what everybody does, but you learn the hard way that you might want to find a different thing. Some of I use more water-based dyes now, and and a lot less aggressive agings, and still to get the same sort of look. A different way to apply the same chemicals more or less, so they don't penetrate quite as deep. They just kind of sit on the surface of the leather instead of invade into the, the different layers.
Okay.
And actually ruin it. I've turned some bags in the early days into crackers, that you just, oh my gosh, you put all that work into sewing it up, and then you go to age the thing back a little, and you could basically break it. That's a little overdone.
Right. Yeah, that kind of trial and error process.
Exactly. Learn the hard way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was why I bought the first half side. It was quite an investment, it felt like at the time. And before that, we just used whatever we could get a hold of, really. You could go to the store and buy remnant bags in like blacksmith sets, I think they call them. Like Farm and Fleet would have just a big plastic bag full of leather pieces.
Okay.
And it was probably all, like not vegetable tan stuff. It wasn't anything you could really tool with unless you got really lucky and some of that was in the bag.
Right.
And I wouldn't have known the difference. At the time, I wouldn't have known the difference. But yeah, it was a long learning curve.
Yeah.
In the end, though, with the book, I ended up with a extra chapter, and they had filled the book as far as they could, and they had all the bags. Those bags weren't mostly mine. They belonged to guys up in Minnesota, that hardcore collectors that had them.
Uh-huh.
And they took all the pictures and inserted all the old bags, and they made the patterns up for it. Really, I just did the construction and the text,
okay.
the how-to text, and they pieced the rest together. I gave it my thumb of approval or whatever, stamp of approval, and here I was with that chapter left. I thought that's a shame, I don't want to leave it at that. So I had sold some tips to Muzzleloader when I was a kid.
Oh, really?
In the late 70s, I remember I could buy a subscription to Muzzleloader if I sent them a tip. And I think Orland Skurlock, it might have been before Bill's time, you'd send a tip, and I think they'd give you $20 or $30 for the tip. They'd publish it if they published it. And
wow.
I'd send a tip and say, hey, could I get a subscription instead? And I'd get the subscription. And at least one time I remember sending them a thing on how to polish target practice, how to roll the lead balls for targets. And they liked that, and I got a free subscription out of it. So I knew that they could be, you could approach them. They were approachable, let's put it that way. So I have this extra chapter, and I thought, well, I'll send it to Muzzleloader. I like Muzzleloader, and maybe they'd be interested. And I said, why stop there? Maybe they'd let me write about doing stuff, because nobody's writing about that right now. And Bill said, if you could get me, a few articles in advance to prove you're serious, they'd like to do something like that. And so I had the one done because it was a boot pouch article. And I hurried up and got him a couple more articles. And he said, yeah, you're on. And that was 15 years ago now. And,
wow.
Been I don't think I missed an issue yet. And of course, that led to some good things with the CLA. I got to chair their CLF auction committee for a while as the set up the auction for the 1812 stuff.
Okay.
Couldn't have been done without David Wright and Frank House and everybody that was involved. I just played a little part trying to round up the donations and, keep it all running forward sort of. And that was a lot of fun. And it was a great time for the 1812 remembrance, and try to keep the theme for the auction.
Yeah.
And then that was a time of American traditions.
Okay.
They were publishing that. So I got to put a couple articles, at least an article in there about Bowie knives. And of course they had all the connections. So they could introduce me to Bill Myers and Joe Musso and, different guys that I could call on to help with the article.
Right.
Get some pictures. And it was one good thing led to another, which led to another. And So you can't beat that. I mean, I've been blessed as far as that goes. Stumble bum, and here I am, people looking at my stuff, and I get to be involved in stuff I never thought I could.
Right. It's really fascinating to me seeing or hearing about here, you know, being a farm boy, trapping the creeks with your muzzleloader, not knowing it was all out
fun.
there.
Yeah, it was fun, and it was based on Janice Holt Giles books.
Yeah.
That book, The Great Adventure, it had it all in a nutshell, you know. And then, of course, that led to the other books like The Mountain Man.
Yeah.
And Vardis Fisher, and some of the other books, Give Your Heart to the Hawks by Winford Blevins. I was blown away one time. The Winford Blevins article or ad that had that book still being in print was on one of the pages for an article that I had in Muzzleloader, and I thought, my goodness, how can that be? How can that be? You know, these things, it's like you're living in a different reality or something for coincidences.
Right.
Like even the Tony Bridges thing, the book that influenced me from my cousin that got me started, that was edited by Tony Bridges. It turns out one of my best friends, Tony Bridges, was his neighbor.
Really?
At one here in Illinois. And I mean, how does that even happen? I couldn't wrap my mind around it, you know, but
it's a small world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about it. But yeah, I learned just enough in those books to think that you should be able to throw a diamond hitch on a pony and let him carry your traps for you while you're running the creeks, you know.
Right.
And so there was books you could read where they had illustrations about prospecting or different things. And so I'd throw an approximation of a diamond hitch on a pony and let him carry my traps down to the creek for me. And it was fun. I don't know if I did it right or wrong, but I was the only one doing it. That's for sure.
Right.
At least in our area.
And you stuck with it too. So I'd say you did it right because you're still into it. Yeah.
I was too Scotch and bullheaded to give up, I guess. At least so far, we're still at it. And it's been nothing but good things, really. The day job is always, you got to have that, or at least I've had to have that. I've never felt confident enough to try it without that.
That's I'm in that same boat, and I know a lot of the people that I talk to and hear from are in that same boat too. You know, there's that kind of that dream to go back to being a kid running through the creeks and doing that, but it's hard to get there. Yeah,
but you can still do stuff.
Yeah.
And, you should. I think I really believe in the doing it yourself. And for 15 years, you know, every article I come up with something different that a guy can do for himself. And, you know, I'm always amazed that somebody wants to buy one of my bags when basically I write about doing it yourself. It's fine. You know, I don't mind that, but people can do a lot more than they think they can. And they can learn to do it in a correct manner. You can learn from the old stuff or somebody that has learned from the old stuff. Mm-hmm. And you can be part of it too. Anytime, you know, anybody could. If one human did it, I believe another can. Maybe not as well. Some people are truly gifted, and I'm not one, but I'm more than happy to try, you know, give it a try. Except for the new stuff, like the new cars and things. I gave up on that a long time ago.
Yeah,
that's over my head.
The new cars now are going to be the car I can afford in I think 10 or so years, maybe. And boy, it's like a spaceship now.
There you go.
I might be hitching up a pony like you're talking about. This podcast is brought to you by Thor Bullets. Thor Bullets are a premium full-bore muzzleloader bullet designed specifically for modern inline rifles. Thor Bullets do not require plastic sabots or belts to be fired, meaning less cleaning for you between shots. The patented copper base creates an airtight seal, giving you greater distance and accuracy. Thor's unique engineering allows the bullets to retain 95% of their weight upon impact, and the controlled expansion ensures large, easy-to-follow blood trails. Thor bullets are currently available in a 50 caliber version that is sized to your specific bore. Thor is also expanding into a new 45 caliber bullet designed for faster 1 in 24 and 1 in 22 twist inline rifles. For more information on these great bullets, visit www.thorbullets.com. We'd like to thank Thor Bullets for their sponsorship of this podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Muzzleloader Magazine, the publication for traditional black powder shooters. Since 1974, Muzzleloader has been the leading magazine devoted to traditional black powder hunting and shooting. Each issue is jam-packed with articles on hunting, shooting, gunsmithing, do-it-yourself projects, living history, American history, book and product reviews, and much, much more. Muzzleloader Magazine is the best traditional muzzleloading magazine, bar none. I'd like to thank Jason at Muzzleloader Magazine for his continued support of I Love Muzzleloading and the I Love Muzzleloading podcast. I don't care what you're into. If you're interested in muzzleloading, this is the kind of magazine I think you need to check out. I've been a fan of Muzzleloader Magazine even before the sponsorship. I've always been impressed with what Jason has been able to put out with Muzzleloader Magazine, and it really means a lot for him to be supporting I Love Muzzleloading and our efforts over here. Thank you, Muzzleloader Magazine, for your support.
But it's not all roses. You eat some crow. One thing, you learn from an old bag.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants to hear what you think you learned. For instance, the old bags, the straps, they went most, not all, but it seemed like a lot of straps were stitched into the top seam of the bag. The flap was sewn right to the back, a two-piece. You have a back, and you have a separate flap, and they're joined across the top with a seam.
Okay.
And into that seam, the strap is inserted. And I thought, you're copying the original like Roy Underhill do. You got to copy it the way he did it.
Yeah.
And then I was rebuffed more or less. You just built a weak point into that bag. You put a zipper in there, and it's going to tear and all that. And I thought, well, they did it that way for a reason. I mean, them old German guys in the Pennsylvania Dutch or whoever made that bag, they did it that way because somebody told them to do it that way, and they were taught to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, at a CLA show, Mark Silver brought me a Lou Sanchez bag that the strap had tore exactly across the top of the seam. And Mark said, take this home, see if you can fix it. It's important to me, and then send it back to me. I had a few tools with me, and I think within less than half an hour, I gave him the bag back. Because if you sew a bag with the strap caught in that seam,
mm-hmm.
when the strap fails, and the strap is going to fail, when it fails, all you got to do is open that little bit of a seam, insert less than a half an inch of that strap, and restitch it. That's all there is to it.
Ah.
If you stitch to the back of the bag and it fails, it could tear the whole back of the bag. I've seen more bags held with rivets and baling wire and everything they could to try and get it to stick to the back panel, which is pretty fragile at that point. But if it's joined at the top, you can tell you'll find a bag without a strap.
Right.
And the old bag looks pretty good. What happened to the strap? Well, the strap failed, and it's going to fail. It seems like straps are going to fail. They get wet on your shoulder. Yeah. All the salts and enzymes and everything runs down. I don't know why it is, but I know that it is. So I still think that learning from the old stuff, there's lessons to be taught rather than just assuming you're building a zipper into the thing and then penalizing for it. That's just an observation I've
right.
made.
No, and I appreciate that because I've been dabbling in kind of the doing it yourself, like you're right about, and playing with some of this stuff. And I'm fortunate to have some opportunities to see some original old stuff, and I try to apply that. And I'm always interested in those interpretations from the old stuff. I mean, yeah, I put my foot in my mouth quite a few times, where I'll have a question, and then, the first comment is, oh, that makes sense as the answer to it, but I think that's part of the fun in all of this is to
sure.
Go through and discuss that and try to figure that out, because it's kind of a puzzle when we're looking at a lot of this old stuff. It's harder and harder to know what was meant or what was intended by that, because we're just starting to get to a point where we're so far removed from, that culture. It's hard to find that. So I really appreciate that, because I've kind of wondered that myself. And the strap is the weak point of that bag. Just about.
Yeah, it's going to fail. I think it's going to fail eventually. I mean, you can use thicker. You can make the bag out of 3 or 4 ounce and the strap out of 5 or 6 ounce and prolong it.
Yeah.
you can use rings, but that's contentious. About everything a guy do, there's a way to be contentious about it somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
But I think if you're copying the old work, maybe not carbon copying it, but at least incorporating the old techniques.
Yeah.
At least you got a defensible position, more or less. I'm not too great at making some of the art bags like a lot of those guys are and stuff, but I don't mind making a nice copy of a bag. And some of those bags, another point, I had always heard a bag is never laced. A bag is never laced. The old guys never laced up a bag that's buckskin or stuff. Well, a guy brought a banded horn to a gun show, and he brought in the bag, a paper bag, a bag that he'd saved from a burn pile. And it turns out it was like the Montgomery bag that's in Jim Webb's book, the one with all the fringe on the face.
Yeah.
And he said, I got the horn. Can you make me a bag to go with it that was like this bag that went with it? And I recognized it as being similar to the Montgomery bag. And I got to take it home and study it. And every bit of that thing was laced. It was all the fringe strips, the strips were sewn across the face with lacing, and they were all individually cut, and then the seams of the bag were laced. Then I started looking through the Madison Grant bag or book on the bags, and across the face of some of those flaps, you can see lacing, as if they had extended the flap, make a beaver tail or something out of it, with some lacing. And I thought, well, they never laced bags except for they did,
Yeah.
So I made copies. I made copies of the Montgomery bag, or the bag that the fella had me to copy, and tried to I think I maybe put it out on Art and Jan's site. That's another wonderful resource we've had at our disposal, and thanks for that for them. But I called it the bearded bag, and the name kind of stuck, I think, and now more people are making them. I'm glad to see it. And it's easier to sew them. Definitely lacing them up is a pain. But that helped me when I got pictures. I wrote a man about the Daniel Boone bag. There's pictures of a Boone bag that was for sale on eBay at one point, and he wanted $250,000, I think, for it. And I wanted to do something along those lines. I'd been studying I've been feeling Daniel Boone, when I make horns in the past, and I thought, well, all I've got is this one picture off of eBay. I wonder if the family would send me more pictures, and maybe I could even go see it and make a copy.
Right.
So I contacted the family, and it was a terrible story. The bag had been stolen, and they didn't know where it was. They did have some pictures. The family sent me some extra pictures. And I wrote a little bit about it for the Boone Society to try and get some publicity out there, because it'll resurface someday.
Yes, it's got to someday.
I thought if we document it, that when it does resurface, people know where it belongs and who it should go back to, at least. But studying the pictures, they were 35 millimeter, regular old time photos. I could see puckers on the seam of that bag where there shouldn't be puckers. And I could see a tear on that flap where it looked like that beaver tail had been once sewn. And then they had a picture of the back of the bag. And I could see plainly where the sheath on the back of that pouch was laced on.
Huh.
So I did those puckers. You don't get puckers like that unless you're lacing that bag together.
Right.
So I'm thinking, did Daniel or whoever, the bag supposedly was one Daniel used up on the Big Sandy and traded to this family before he left for Missouri, and they had kept it ever since. And the genealogy, there was nothing wrong with their family tree, basically, that made that story false.
Right. It all checked out.
Yeah, yeah, sure enough. So I thought, well, here's a bag that maybe Boone made that's laced. And so I made a copy, and I got the same puckers and things. So for what it's worth, I mean, that and a cup of or a quarter buy me a cup of coffee, maybe not. But so you can lace a bag, if you're making the right sort of bag.
Yeah.
There's examples that a guy can go by, and So the straps, the laces, there's no hard and fast rules, it seems. If you look, you can find anomalies to all this stuff, more or less.
Yeah, there's a great variety too. And, you know, I struggle because I'm interested in a wide swath of time on a lot of this stuff. And I haven't like narrowed down to a specific decade like some folks out there do. And I commend that for the level of detail they can put into that and that research and things. But I think when you open up and you start looking at, you know, maybe 100 years, you know, 1750 to 1850, we'll say, there's a whole lot of stuff happening there. And there's enough stuff to keep you occupied all day.
Goodness. And here I thought, honestly, I thought you'd have to go to Kentucky or Tennessee or Montana, you know, to find any history. And basically growing up in this area, that's what we were taught in history, that there is no history here.
Right. Yeah.
But as it turns out, right now we live on land that was owned by a man named Clark, who was instrumental in digging the I&M Canal, set up this town Utica, mined Portland cement, was famous enough to the extent that Francis Parkman came to Utica to try and find Starved Rock in LaSalle's old fort, St. Louis. Huh. And when Parkman came, he stayed with the man that owned the land the little place that we live on. And Parkman described this land as part of the Indian burial grounds from Levantum, that was the big Kaskaskia site that was around Starved Rock. Wow. And that was 1680. So for no history, right. I mean, 1680, the history started here with the French and then the Beaver Wars. This was central to the Beaver Wars. And then even Gurdon S. Hubbard, when he worked for the American Fur Company, he came right down the Illinois River with voyageurs and canoes, picking up the furs from all the little trading posts up and down the creeks and rivers here on the way to St. Louis. And so for no history, I mean, this is where Black Hawk was, where the massacres were. Nathan Boone was within 5 miles of the house here during the War of 1812 when they came up on their scouts. Who knows what history, but I was amazed and kind of angry that most people here don't know a thing about it. Yeah, they're not likely to find it out. But I didn't really have to move anywhere to
to find that. Yeah. I mean, we don't necessarily think of, you know, we think of Illinois being pretty far west for the 18th century, but there's activity there.
Tons.
So do you think that's part of what kept you or drew you to kind of the muzzleloading? I mean, you said you didn't really find this out as a kid, but do you think that kind of kept you coming back as you learned that as an adult?
Yeah. I actually was pretty interested in music through the service, although I did have a CVA Hawken kit in my locker. I was trying to build it through the Marine Corps. Didn't get very far, but I was more interested in playing music. You know, that was a better panacea at the time. And I actually met my wife when I went to give her brother guitar lessons, and I was pretty serious about that. But finding the history here, finding there was still rendezvous going on. There was still centennial type celebrations for the little towns and things. And it drew me right back. And then the more history I learned, the more I wanted to learn more, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And then the more you learn, the more you want to do, at least for me, try to do. And it kept me really involved. Learning that there was history here kept me here and wanting to learn more.
I can't let you slip by without talking a little bit about trying to build the CVA Hawken while in the Marines.
Yeah, it was missing parts. It was on sale in the PX. It was really cheap. And I even though I had built that Numeric kit and a couple of CVA pistol kits in junior high and in high school, I thought, you know, this is too good. And I was always jealous of a friend who at Kmart during the Blue Light Special bought a Thompson Center kit. And I didn't buy it. I bought, I forget what I bought, a Bowie knife kit or something stupid. But he bought the good thing. And I was always so jealous of that when I saw this CVA kit that kind of looked like the Thompson Center at the time, I had to have it.
Right.
And I kept it in my locker or out in the trunk of my car if there was going to be an inspection. And I thought I could put it together, and I don't know what I thought, just that I had it.
Yeah.
But it was missing the under rib. It was missing a couple of pipes. I ended up making it. I made it the year I got out of the service, finished it, and made a wooden under rib, kind of cobbled it together. And it was a good rifle. It was a good rifle. But yeah, I bought it in the service and kind of hid it away because I don't know if you're supposed to have it or not in your locker. That was between 79 and 83. So Ronald Reagan, he probably would have understood, I you
Yeah, I think you could have called him up, I think, and he would have allowed it.
It would have been all right.
Yeah, I like to think that. You say what you want about Reagan, but I think he would have liked muzzleloaders.
Probably. And that was once I got out of the service. I went back to working at grain elevators. Worked for Cargill for a while. Actually butchered for a while up at Dubuque. Anything to make end meets. In '83, it was a pretty good recession, as I recall.
Yeah.
But I was able to buy even though it was Japanese at the time, Dixie squirrel rifle, or they called it their mountain rifle, which they had just switched to Japan from Belgium, I believe, and you got the Mikuru barrels and the Japanese steel, and it was really good rifle. That was the next one I bought and built, and I added the banana patch box. I was trying to go, and I also added Pennsylvania style carving, which I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew everything I liked and thought it should all be gun.
Yeah.
It didn't turn out too terrible, but.
Do you still have that?
Yeah. I have never really sold any of the muzzleloaders. Yeah, I still got the first one. Still got the buggy rifle.
I would love to see pictures sometime if you could. I just love that stuff.
We can make it happen. That buggy rifle was terrible, though.
I've heard that about those.
They were accurate, but that cap, for years, you could see shrapnel in my wrist. That cap would just unmercifully, if you didn't have a long sleeve, and we didn't always in the summer,
right?
It would spit that cap shards down into your forearm or down into your wrist, and it'd draw blood sometimes.
Huh.
But yeah, I still got it. I put a Schutzen style butt plate on it. I had to do that.
Okay.
I don't know why. Somebody souped one up. I think I saw maybe an early Brent Gertek souped up version. And so I had to try and soup this one up. And so I'll be happy to send you pictures if you don't laugh too hard.
No. I love that era of muzzleloading, and I love seeing how people made it work. And hearing that you took the Dixie squirrel rifle and just added everything that you wanted it to be into it, I think is just so extremely special. Like, I'm not buttering you up here or anything, but there's a level of this that I love about the history and the accuracy of it, and trying to understand what our ancestors went through and what it took to get us here to where we're at today.
Oh, you know it.
But then there's also a level of me where my grandfathers were in that period and just trying to figure it out and trying to go have fun with their buddies. And there's a level of specialness to that I hold to high esteem.
If for old tools, I love tools that have been hand forged out of other tools. Old things. A guy needed a farrier's knife or something, for hoof work. Mm-hmm. And so he just made it out of whatever old tool he could, a file or an old wrench or whatever. And you can see what it used to be. You can see what it was turned into, and you can see the man's tool marks that did it.
Yes.
Any tool like that, boy, I just have to put it in the collection.
Yep.
And just look at it. You can find them. You can find it in the gun stuff too. I've got a few, the shotgun bag. It's used for measuring out shot. It's like the English Charger or the Irish Charger.
Mm-hmm.
I've got one with an English Charger, the lever, where the spring broke. But that didn't stop them from using it. They cut a piece of a rubber ball and they wrapped it on with thread so that the rubber ball made up a spring.
Right.
So they still carry it in the field. It's like, oh my goodness, that must have been pretty late, 1900s or something.
Right. And they're still using it.
I've got an old gun to match. They did everything they could to keep this thing running. When the thimbles fell off, they put some leather on it. I've got another gun that's had a lock plate kind of brazed over the old lock plate to keep the thing going. You know, it's what they did is not always what we'd expect to
right.
be done today. But it's neat when you find an example of it.
Yeah. That human ingenuity can make a work of art, or it can make something functional, you know, kind of two sides of the coin.
Yeah, that one little rifle that was kind of cobbled together to keep it running, no matter what it took to keep it running. People look at that, and once they get past all the ingenuity that's been used on the thing, they go, you know, that's a really nice hand-forged swamp barrel on that thing.
Right.
And, you know, it is. How long did that rifle keep going? You know, it's pretty neat.
So can I ask a little bit more detail about that piece? Where'd you find it, and where do you think it came from?
My wife is always helping to find me stuff.
That's wonderful.
Whenever she sees something that she thinks I'd like, she'll let me know. And she saw a guy was selling some guns in a town about 30 miles north of us. And I said, yeah, I'd like to take a look. And off we went and took a look, and there it lay. And I just bought it. And that's as simple as it was.
Wow.
And that you don't really study it when you're buying it, you know, but when you get it home, you study it for days.
Yeah.
And all those little things jumped out, and take it to a few shows, you know, get a few opinions, and then just lock it in the closet for a while.
Yeah.
So the next guy gets to take care of it. That's about all we are as curators.
Yeah. You know, you're passing it from one generation to the next, you know.
That's it.
And that's what's important about it, for sure.
And sometimes you learn things that you don't really want to learn, or you learn not to be taken in by everything you hear, like the old Russell knives, you know, the 6-pin knives and all that.
Okay.
The buckskinners, boy, you got one of them, and that was, you know, you'd have to pay real money to get one from them. Let's put it that way. And then I found an old Spencer Hibbard Bartlett catalog from 1935 or so. Oh, there they were. 6-pin Green River knives with the stamp, you know, for sale right then in 1935. So,
right.
So no wonder we're finding them coming out of garage sales on the farms around here. They're coming out of kitchens, not out of trappers camps.
Right.
But, you know, it's still neat, but it takes some of the mystique out of it, but you kind of rather have the truth, you know?
Right.
And then now again, you'll find a real treasure, because we're close enough to St. Louis and some of the frontier that you do find a real treasure now and again. But yeah, and usually it just pops out of the woodwork. Yeah. And you got to be smart enough to buy it when you see it, which I'm not always, you know.
I don't think any of us are.
There was a flea market with a Manton side by side. And the guy, it was in sad shape, missing a hammer, broken springs, blah, blah, blah. And it was in a barrel and with the other guns. And he lifted it out, and they were making fun of it because the stock was bent. It warped, and they were laughing. And I passed it up. And when I was praying that it'd be at the next show. It was a monthly show. The same guy show up every time. Okay. And they put me right in my place when I asked about it. They go, you know, I think I just sold that an hour ago. It's like, why didn't I buy it when I saw it? You know? Yeah. By the time I figured out what it was, and that, yeah, I probably should buy that. It was too late. And that ain't the only one that I've done that to. So that'd be some advice if there is anything there.
Oh, geez.
When you see it, buy it.
Right. Yeah. That's something I'm kind of learning, is I try to, you know, I'm working and I've got a young family here, but you know, sometimes something comes up that is really special to you. And, you know, pinch a few pennies to make that happen. You know, you're just holding on to it, you know, until you're in the dirt,
and you can probably get the money back, and you can learn from it. That's the best thing. 'Cause you learn how funny it sounds for somebody to think it's warped or bent when you know it was cast on or cast off. And
right. Yeah.
That kind of thing is the mark of quality, not inferiority. And that the experts, or the so-called experts that have the table that's selling it, they might not know everything you assume they know.
You might be able to get a good deal on it.
Well, not only that, but you recognize the thing for what it is, and are able to appreciate and maybe value it for the way it should be. You know, safe. We learned that, believe it or not, we kind of learned that early on, and sort of a sidebar field. It could have gone this way for me. We were really into artifacts, collecting, surface hunting arrowheads,
Yeah.
and trying to make sense of what we were finding, where we were finding it, to the point that soil survey came out for our surrounding counties, and we bought those soil surveys as soon as they were available, and we overlaid it with plat maps where we knew we were repeatedly finding similar types of points. And so we were able. This guy had a vast enough collection that we were able to say, okay, for the Paleolithic period, where were you finding, Paleolithic, Clovis or microchips or, and then he could remember that when they tiled through here, they found some mammoth bones. And
oh my gosh.
We were able to identify kettle moraine type soils, and predominantly that's where they were killing the mastodons, or where mastodons have been found, or he's finding the early Paleolithic stuff. And we could kind of overlay that with the hardened barbs and the early archaics, and the woodlands, not so much around here, but the archaic and the some of the early woodlands we'd find. But we were able to start to make sense of this to the point where we wrote the university about, of all things, bolo stones, because we were studying, Bushmen, they were the last hunters that you could kind of equate to they were writing about them, and they were living subsistence hunting lifestyles.
Right.
We thought, well, that's kind of like the guys might have been living around here, and they were only successful maybe 1 out of every 5 or 6 times they tried to take game. So the state was saying that bolo stones were like they used down in South America. You tie them together in threes and you wing them out at a duck. And we're thinking, if you're going to throw 18 of those stones to get 1 duck, and as elaborate as those stones are made, there's something wrong with that theory.
Right. That's a lot of work to throw it.
Exactly. So we asked about that, and boy, were we put in our place. And it didn't change our mind, but we realized that we weren't going to get a lot of help from the experts on some of these things. Right down to the way a hardened barb or any of those early points, they just get narrower, and you sharpen it and it gets narrower, and the base stays the same, but they get narrower and narrower. And we could go through Floyd's collection basically and lay out a pristine, unsharpened point all the way down to a point that was, maybe a 1/4 inch long, fluted, angled on either side, which they said was so it would spin through the air. The experts that we talked to, it imparted spiral for accuracy. And we're like, wait a minute. To us, this implies that this thing was permanently hafted on like a knife handle maybe. And then it was sharpened by the guy from one side. Then he'd flip it over and he'd sharpen it on the other side. It was the way he sharpened the thing. Right. And it was on the handle. It was not a drill point. It was not an awl point. It was a knife that the guy sharpened and sharpened. And using that same theory, we thought, maybe these points were mounted permanently on a short haft, and they were shot from darts out of the atlatl, where maybe the shaft actually bounced off, and you could use the shaft over again and just keep putting these little handled darts into these shafts. And that was 40 years ago, and now it's kind of accepted theory. And we just got it from looking at this stuff and taking a stupid farmer guess at how it might have worked. But we were seriously into that.
Right.
And I still sort of think the same way. You come up with a good idea about why things might work the way they are. Well, you might be right.
There's that, it gets kind of ethereal, I think, or however you want to talk about it. But, you joke about it being a dumb farmer theory, but you're out there, as a farmer and, working on an orchard or in your gardens or something, and you're working with your hands and you're making stuff and figuring this stuff out. And to me, it makes sense that you can look at and study those things and think about how it was used and how it may have been used. I mean, because you're still kind of shooting in the dark, but it makes a lot of sense to me for people that work with their hands and can kind of study that from that angle, can get to that point. Not to knock any of the historians out there or anything,
but everybody should be able to contribute what they think they know, or learn, keep learning.
And there's a I think I've talked about it before. To me, there's kind of that connection, you know, from the person that was making it to you studying it. There's a connection there, and you're touching that and holding that. And when you're talking about having this collection of these points and these stones that have been worked, laid out, I mean, wow, that just sounds incredible. I mean, every year when they start disking the fields around here, we're out there, you know, seeing what we can find.
We had a bog site that kept turning up stone axe heads. I mean, not one, not two, maybe 6, 7, 8. And they kept turning up.
Wow.
And we got 3 of them broken in half. 3 of them broken in half, same way. And then we found one of the broken halves. And we're like, how can this happen? What was going on at this bog site? And we think they were actually using those to work wood to such an extent, like using it the back end as a maul, that they actually just cracked them. You know, they hit something hard enough that it just cracked the thing right down the middle. And it was pretty neat to have a bunch from the same site, a bunch of, you know, axes broken half, you know, long ways. They could still use them. It was pretty neat. And one thing leads to another. It wasn't useless information, you know, to learn all that.
Right.
We were at a breakfast before a gun show there in Princeton, and they were talking about arrowheads. And of course, for whatever reason, I felt brave enough to pipe up something. And pretty much what I was just saying to you, you know, early archaic, using all the big terms or whatever I thought I knew. And Jimmy Dressler was like, hey, you know your stuff. And that was kind of my introduction to him, and it broke the ice for him to want to talk to me, which, you know, I thought that was pretty neat. That even guys like that were still interested in this stuff, you know, at that level. Yeah. And I thought that was pretty cool.
I think that's something neat. You know, it's, you know, we might focus on a particular era, but there's still that, you know, that through line, you know, wanting to learn about how older things were done. And
sure. Endless curiosity.
Yeah.
Endless curiosity. It's either in your blood or it's not. Seems like some folks maybe aren't so interested in different things, and they're happy that way, but I don't think I could be.
Yeah. I've got lifelong friends that aren't really interested in this stuff at all, but boy, for me, I can't imagine not wanting to talk about it and learn about it. It's just
all about it.
Just too neat.
But it may run in the family. I had a ancestor that he came from Scotland. He got clearanced out in the 1850s. They just rounded up everybody in Rossshire. The women and children threw him on a boat and said, you know, bon voyage. Jeez. He ended up here. He fought in the Civil War and promptly became, when the opportunity arose, tattooed man in Pawnee Bill's Wild West show. So it was like, there you go, Grandpa.
Wow.
So you wonder how much of that gene is in your, you know, what he must have been interested in, what was over the next hill, and learning different things. You wonder what you got from people like that, and you want to learn about people like that, and it opens up horizons that you never think that you could be interested in. Everything from, you know, the West to the Scottish stuff to the circuses, you know, you name it. You can be interested in anything at any point, you know, if you let yourself. But that also leads to the jack of all trades, master of none phenomenon, which I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's what I am, I'm sure. I don't have enough focus to really focus on too much for too long.
No, I'm in kind of the same boat as I kind of, things kind of come in waves for me. I'll get really interested in one thing and knock out a few things, and then I kind of let it set for a year or a couple of years or 5 years, and you know, kind of sits on the edge of the bench, and you know, I'll go down to the shop one day and be like, you know, I've got an idea on that. And
there's, you know, until I can see a project from start to finish and how it's supposed to look, until I can see that in my head, I won't start it. I'll just ruin it if I do. If I try to force it and I don't have a vision to go with it, it's going to be garbage. I already know that. So if it takes years, I'll wait years.
Right.
You know, that's fine. I've ruined enough stuff that I know better than to start it unless I can see it finished. But what that leads to is I'm always buying raw materials for things I think I see. So I've got sheds full of junk. I mean, my daughter is going to much stuff she's not going to know what to do with. It's unbelievable. But yeah, there's a lifetime worth of projects out there. If somebody can see anything in the stuff that's out there, because it might just be a stick of wood, it might be an old wagon spoke. Mm-hmm. It might be somebody shut forged a old hinge, like a strap hinge.
Yeah.
And the eye was perfect on that thing to make it. And just with a little hammering on the forge, it made a beautiful spontoon hawk, and how you see that in a pile of junk underneath a table at a sale, I don't know. But when I saw it, that's what I saw. And that's what it was,
It calls to you.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of stuff that has called to me that's sitting in boxes now in my shed that I hope somebody can see the same sort of thing in it someday, because I'll probably never get it all done. I'm sure
it's hard to get it all done, that's for sure. That's
and it's even harder to get rid of it,
Right, yeah, because the potential's right there.
It's my fault it's not turned into something,
Yeah.
I should have been more diligent. But yeah, either way it's out there. But yeah, I could never go to a sale again and have enough to do for the rest of my life, I'm afraid.
Well, I think that's good. I'm going to enable you here a little bit and say that's good.
Good deal.
And I encourage anybody listening to do the same, because you can scroll on your phone, you can play some games, or you can go collect some junk and turn it into something.
There you go.
That's what I'm lobbying for.
If you ever need a special piece of junk, give me a call, because I might have it.
Okay.
I'd be more than happy to send it your way.
I'm going to add you to my junk network that I'm building.
Good deal. I appreciate that.
Oh, shoot.
My daughter appreciates it more than you'll know.
I'll say I felt that way when I was younger about my folks. I remember one of the earliest road trips I remember. It's deviating a little bit from our conversation here, but I grew up as a Roy Underhill house, and every week on PBS when he would come on, we would all sit down, or my parents would at least sit down, and I'd be right there watching Roy Underhill. And
way to go.
One weekend, I can't remember how old I was, probably 6 or 7. I think my sister was real young, and this would have been in the late 90s, showing my age there a little bit. But my folks loaded us up in the car, and we drove for what felt like forever at that age into Ohio, which you can drive forever into Ohio and not go anywhere. And we met Roy Underhill that day.
Oh my goodness.
And it was just, I always remember that. And it was just delightful. And
that's wonderful.
And so you kind of grow up a little bit, and, I've, goofed on my folks a little bit, for some of the quote junk, out in the shop or in the sheds and things. But now I'm any weekend that I have free from work, I can go out and make or tinker with just about anything I want and play with that, and try to make something. And
that's wonderful. And that's disappearing. That opportunity's disappearing.
Yeah.
The antiques at the sales are not what they used to be.
No.
You can't, I feel sad for a guy that wanted to build up a collection of, hand woodworking tools, or even the hand leather tools or anything. It's going to cost you.
Yeah.
And you're going to search far and wide. Just the stuff that used to be, you'd leave stuff lay on the tables because you already bought too much,
Right. Yeah. I mean, coming away with buckets, 5-gallon buckets as a kid. I remember Dad buying of tools and things. It's not that way anymore. It's hard to, and it goes for muzzle loading too. It's things are just different. But I think if the passion's there, there are people out there that are going to help you get along with that.
True. That's true. And you'd rather do it while you have the chance than regret you didn't, or find out that you should have. Like when I was stationed in Carolina, nothing stopped me from going to Chapel Hill and, knocking on Roy's shop, but I didn't.
Right.
And nothing stopped me from going to the mountains and, looking for face jugs and the old pottery and things. I didn't, I just didn't know enough to, I guess. But now, now I know, and the opportunity's not there.
Well,
so
now there's somebody listening that's going to hear that and put that to his heart or her heart. Good. And go out and do it,
But they need to do it. Yep, they need to do it. That's for sure. Strike when not taught, I think they used to say, right?
Yeah, that's an old saying, I think. Yeah. Well, that kind of segues into some of the last few questions I have for you here.
Sure.
A little bit on what tips you would have for an aspiring craftsman, and some books or resources that you would point somebody to.
Anything that inspires you to go down that path that you want to go down. The Alan Eckert books were real inspirational and keeping me inspired, learning about Simon Kent and, all that history.
Yeah.
That kept the spark alive. Any of the Mountain Man books, the early stuff, and I'm not aware of any of the new stuff, but the early stuff was kind of pure, kind of clean. It was good stuff. You wouldn't mind your kids reading it or whatever. And I liked it, and it was inspirational. It kept my spark alive. If you're interested in the traditional woodworking and stuff, there's probably more, but Roy Underhill has a whole bunch of books about that. And now the books that are available for guys interested in the muzzleloading and accoutrements, some of the stuff put out by the KRA, some of the publications like Jason, the Muzzleloader, we got the best resources available now. You can do it online. A lot of times you can find more stuff online with just simple searches. Mm-hmm. And if you can buy the books, you won't go wrong buying a nice hardcover edition when they first come out. Because I've learned the hard way that once those are out of print, they're going to cost a lot of money. You better buy it when you see it, or be prepared to pay, $500-600 sometimes for the same thing.
Yeah.
It
can be a little hard to swallow, especially if you're young, a book that's, $80, $90, $100.
Yeah.
But boy, in 10 years, if that book's not been reprinted and you want to go and get it, you're going to pay.
Yeah. That I learned that the hard way with Mark Baker's book when that Sons of the Trackless Forest came out.
Oh my goodness.
I was really interested in Bonnie and Heather bought me a copy for Father's Day, I think. And I was so happy, and I kept it pristine. And then next thing you know, they're $500-$700, whether or not people are really paying that or they're just asking it, I don't know. Then you see the same thing with the Moravian gun making books and the Flaterman book on Bowie knives, and any of the early stuff. It's just, it would have been better to buy them when they were in the under $100 range.
Yeah.
But like everything, that advice may not be true tomorrow, but those kind of resources are available to keep a spark going. If you want to make knives, if you want to make Bowie knives, now's the time, because there's more out there, more better makers, more information known, more stuff available to study and keep that spark. At least for me, if I'm not studying and reading about it and thinking about it, it's hard to keep that focus going. So a library for me is essential.
Yeah.
You got to have a library of stuff and access to it. And then the raw materials, keep your raw materials, look for something in something, look to make something out of junk if you can, or if you want to buy the parts and everything, everything is available now. Well, I shouldn't say that because of COVID. It's kind of hard to get parts right now. I just went through a bunch of hoops just rounding up a set of Hawken parts, and but maybe that'll change. And the parts that are available now are better than ever. I mean, some of the best stuff available, I'd say.
Yeah.
Just whatever it takes to keep inspired and keep that dream going, for sure. And keep your family in mind. Don't be selfish about it. They got to come first, or you're doing something wrong too. So
right. I really like the note you had early on in this conversation here about looking for something that you could do and be around the family.
Yeah, that to me that was always real important, and I'm sure it is to everybody. That. Yeah. That's you don't get that. You don't get to do that over. When the kids are small, they're only small for a while. And you're only young for a while, and you might ought to treasure some of that too. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Good way to be, I thought.
I like that.
Out.
Yeah.
Worked out. It works. And then Bonnie finds more stuff for me than I could ever find for me too. So
I love that. I love that so much.
It's a blessing. That's for sure.
So she didn't let you set up a workshop in the dining room, but she does help you find stuff.
Yeah, she needed the dining room apparently. So I agree, sort of.
I love that. I'll tell you a little note about my wife. She came to me one day and wanted to talk about the beaver wars.
Oh yeah.
And I just fell in love with that. And she has just been off and on researching the beaver wars because she's just totally fascinated with it. And
Cool.
I love that she, didn't grow up around muzzleloading, didn't really grow up around guns or anything, but has found something that interests her in this time period and that we can enjoy and share together. And I love that. And you mentioning the beaver wars, I have to tell TC about Paisley and the beaver wars.
That's of immense benefit too, because when you study the way things really were, I don't know how to say this without getting politically saying it, but if you study the way things really were back then and how people treated each other back then from, one region to the next region, you won't be taken in by a lot of the stuff they're trying to tell you today. You'll realize that the past was a little different. Today might not be so bad. And there's some good stuff out there too. Now it's not all bad. Without history, what do they say? You're doomed to relive the mistakes that if you don't in the future, if you don't know your past or something.
Yeah.
That's true. And so for her to be interested in that, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. You get an education. They didn't teach it in school.
Right. Yeah. We talked a little bit there about how things are so much different than they used to be, but the access to information has never been better.
How about it?
And that's something that I'm very, very happy about. And I try to, I'm beating that horse. It's not going anywhere, but I'm beating that horse.
Yeah, you can without that, boy, life would be, that's one good thing that you can just, Google up something and, let it take you somewhere in the books and some of the journals and some of the things that are available. And then that little thing that you push that 100% and 150 and 175 so I can actually see it too. That makes it really nice because, it's getting harder and harder to see some of this print. And but when you can instantly digitally make it bigger, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good things. And that's cool. When the Iroquois came against Tonti in the Kaskaskia or the Miamis and them that he had, and he went out to make peace, and he had some of the Frenchmen and their guns there, and the Iroquois guy stabbed him in the chest, but the blade was so flimsy that it wrapped around his rib instead of stuck him in the heart. That was about 7 miles from where I'm sitting right now.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And at Starved Rock there, they've got quite an assemblage from the Newell site, it was called.
Okay.
I think that might have been as late as 1711 or so, but some of the French guns that they have pieces of, and some of the things that were made out of kettles and like the Kaskaskia points that they rolled.
Yeah.
And Man in the Moon train beads that came from Mackinac. They think, from Turkey or the Far East, but eventually made their way to Mackinac Island and then down the chain with the French. And it was a little post-Beaver Wars, but Starved Rock was built for the Beaver Wars at the time. So, all that happened, as I learned, here. It's pretty cool.
That's wonderful. I love to hear that. That passion for local history, I think, is something that we can all dive into a little bit deeper.
Heck yeah.
Sure.
Heck yeah. Yep. It makes it precious. It makes it real.
Yeah.
And, it gives you roots. Without roots, we're done anyways. So.
Yeah. I like that, man. That's a good way to put it. So where can people find your work? I've taken up a lot of your time here. So.
No, I'm terrible about, keeping everything in one spot or having my own website or whatever, which I don't, and I don't Facebook. But honestly, Art and Jan have posted a ton of my stuff on their website, the Contemporary Makers blog. Yeah. And if a person goes there and just types TC Albert and do a search on their site, they'll get a few pages of my stuff. And they can see some of the assorted projects I've done over the years. They've been real good about it, posting everything for me. Other than that, Muzzleloader, every issue has something different I've decided to try and make or do. Google search sometimes will yield a little bit under TC Albert, but not a whole lot. But image search will do more than that. Or they could just contact me. if they want to talk about anything related to this stuff. Be happy to.
Cool.
The CLA, my information's available on that art site, so it's already out there, so that's not a problem.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, the email at huntingpouch@gmail.com, and that's me.
Wonderful. I'll be sure to have that in the show notes, for each of the for this episode, I should say, and so that people can find that information and reach out to you if they have questions. I mean, for me, I feel like I'm going to be thinking about our conversation here for quite a while. So there might be some late night emails sent your way.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, yeah, that'd be wonderful. Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me ramble on. I appreciate it.
No, this was great.
I'm amazed somebody wants to hear me ramble on. I'm glad. I
have found that you'd be surprised at the number of people that would like to hear you ramble on.
Oh man. Well, I am out in the middle of nowhere and I don't keep up with a whole lot. But it's a pleasant surprise to hear for sure.
I'd like to thank Mr. Albert once again for taking the time out of his day and away from his family here to talk with us and share everything that you just listened to. I really can't thank him enough. I've taken quite a few notes from this conversation. I'm going to put as much as I can into the show notes and the description for this episode, as well as at the blog post that goes with this episode at ilovemuzzleloading.com. I hope regardless of where you're at in your muzzleloading journey, you found some inspiration, some humor, and some enjoyment in this conversation, in this episode. Again, can't thank Mr. Albert here enough for coming out and chatting with me here on the show and being willing to share that with all of you. If there's somebody out there that you'd like me to reach out to and try to talk to, please shoot me an email at ilovemuzzleloading@gmail.com, and I'll do my best to organize and get a conversation going with the folks out there so that we can preserve some more of these stories and keep them heard for future generations. That's kind of the driving focus behind the podcast here and behind everything we do at I Love Muzzleloading is trying to make sure that future generations can hear from the people that we've heard from and the people that we've learned from, to try to keep all this around and do our part really and try to give back to the community in that manner. So as always, my email inbox is open. I'm open to any feedback and critique. Got a lot of great feedback on the podcast here recently, which I really appreciate. That really means that we're getting out and we're making the kind of impact that I'd like to see from these conversations, the aspiring craftsmen and the wherever you're at in your muzzleloading journey, it seems like you're enjoying this. And so I do truly appreciate that. As we're recording here, we have a few shows coming up. I'm going to be at a couple, family and work kind of restricts my travel time, but I'll be at the Connor Long Rifle Show in Noblesville, Indiana. That's February 18th and 19th. And then I'll be at the Kalamazoo Living History Show, March 18th and 19th. It's that weekend, the 19th, 18th, 19th, 20th weekend in there. I don't have a calendar in front of me right now. But please, if you're at one of those shows and you see me, come around and pull me aside and talk to me a little bit about muzzleloading. I'd love to hear, just like in the podcast here, I'll just love hearing about how people got into it and what they did and how they kept their interest going in it. That's all I have for you this week. Again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. If there's somebody out there that might be interested in this kind of thing, share the podcast with them. And if you'd like to support the show a little bit, you can leave a review on iTunes or Spotify. That helps us reach kind of semi-organically through the mystical algorithms out there, people that might not know that they're interested in this kind of thing, but would be interested in it. So we've had a few questions about that kind of thing, about how to help spread awareness and support the show a little bit. And really, those are two great things that you can do that really help out the program. So I really appreciate that. Really appreciate all of you listening. I'm truly ever thankful for all the support that we have here. I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.